In March 2012, the body of 48-year-old Gregory Thompson was found on the living room floor of his home at 237 Maple Avenue in Ridgewood, Illinois. His skull was fractured and a fireplace poker lay discarded beside him, covered in blood. What first appeared to be a home invasion quickly unraveled into something far more shocking. An investigation uncovered the scandalous affair between Gregory's wife, Elaine Thompson, and 18-year-old high school senior Jason Miller, their next-door neighbor. In July 2011, on a quiet suburban street, a secret relationship began. One built on seduction, obsession, and manipulation. Over the months that followed, their passion deepened, but so did Elaine's desperation. By February 2012, she had made a fateful decision. Gregory had to die. What started as a forbidden love affair would spiral into a murder plot, a betrayal, and a town that would never forget the scandal that tore it apart. The quiet town of Ridgewood, Illinois, was never the kind of place where sirens cut through the crisp morning air. But on the morning of March 6, 2012, that silence shattered. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as flashing red and blue lights filled 237 Maple Avenue, a two-story suburban home that had never drawn attention before. Inside, the scene was one that even seasoned officers found hard to stomach. Gregory Thompson, 48, lay sprawled on the hardwood floor of his own living room. His body was positioned in an unnatural way, his arms bent awkwardly at his sides, as if he had fallen mid-struggle. A deep wound at the back of his head left a dark stain on the polished wooden planks, the blood spreading outward like a grotesque halo. His face was eerily still, his mouth slightly open, his eyes half-lidded, caught between the last moments of life and the eternity of death. Just inches away, the weapon that had ended his life lay discarded, a fireplace poker, its iron frame now bent from the force of the impact. Dried blood clung to its surface, forming uneven patterns that told a silent story of violence. The officers moved through the house with slow, deliberate steps. The air inside carried a metallic tang. The scent of blood mingled with the faint trace of something floral, possibly a candle or perfume that still lingered in the air. It was a haunting contrast, the mixture of something meant to be soothing against the undeniable presence of death. Gregory's body showed signs of a struggle. His neck bore faint bruises, almost like ghostly fingerprints, the imprint of hands that had tried to choke the life out of him before a different method was chosen. His knuckles were bruised as well, hinting at a fight, a desperate attempt to fend off an attacker who had no intention of stopping until the job was finished. There was no sign of forced entry, nothing to suggest an outsider had been responsible. The doors were locked. The house was undisturbed, except for the living room where Gregory had fallen. The attack hadn't been random. It had come from someone inside, someone he knew. It didn't take long for Detective Samuel Carter to make his first conclusion. This was not a break-in gone wrong. This was not an act of robbery. This was personal. By 8:30 a.m., the forensic team arrived. The house was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. Photographers captured every angle, every drop of blood, every detail that could later be pieced together like fragments of a nightmare. Investigators dusted for fingerprints, collected fibers, and examined Gregory's body for any additional clues. Surveillance footage was their next priority. Gregory had installed cameras inside his home, a security measure he had put in place years ago. What they saw when they pulled up the recordings would unravel a story more twisted than anyone expected. The footage from March 5, 2012, showed Gregory arriving home late, his suitcase in hand. He had just returned from a week-long business trip, looking tired but otherwise normal. He placed his keys on the counter, rolled his stiff shoulders, and moved through the house like a man settling back into familiar surroundings. At 11:07 p.m., he entered the living room. At 11:12 p.m., he wasn't alone anymore. A figure emerged from the hallway. Elaine Thompson, 48, his wife. She had been home the entire time. She had been waiting. The next few minutes of footage were silent but heavy with tension. The camera, positioned at an angle near the kitchen, had no sound, but body language told a story that needed no words. Elaine stood still at first, watching Gregory from across the room. Her hands were tense, her arms stiff at her sides. Gregory turned to face her, his movements slower, more uncertain, like he had sensed something was off. A conversation followed, one-sided at first. Elaine's gestures were small at first, but quickly became more forceful. Gregory shook his head. She stepped closer. He took a step back. At 11:18 p.m., Elaine raised an arm. The tension broke. Gregory reacted, but not fast enough. Something was said, something that made him turn toward the fireplace. That was when she struck. By March 8, 2012, police had gathered enough evidence to bring Elaine Thompson in for questioning. She had no alibi. She was home that night. She was the last person to see Gregory alive. And as detectives would soon discover, she had a motive that ran deeper than any of them could have imagined. Elaine and Gregory had been married for over 20 years, but those years had not been happy ones. Their marriage had started like any other, full of promise, of whispered words in the dark, of dreams built together. But time had eroded all of it. Gregory had become more distant, more consumed by his work, leaving Elaine in a house that felt more like a prison with every passing year. And then there was the affair. Police had suspected something was off when they checked Elaine's phone records. Multiple late-night calls, hundreds of text messages. One name appeared again and again: Jason Miller. At first, they assumed it was a relative, a friend, but then they looked closer. Jason Miller was not an old friend. He was not a family member. He was an 18-year-old high school senior. He was their next-door neighbor. Elaine had known Jason since he was a child. Their families had always been friendly, exchanging casual greetings over fences, sharing holiday cookies. But something had changed in the last year. Jason had grown up. By the time he turned 18 in early 2011, he was no longer just the boy next door. He was tall, charismatic, confident, a stark contrast to Gregory, who barely acknowledged her presence anymore. Elaine had always been beautiful, and she knew it. She carried herself with an effortless grace, her beauty untouched by time, her presence magnetic. But Gregory had stopped looking at her long ago. Jason, however, had not. It started small, a glance held too long, a casual touch that lingered. Jason was different. He listened to her. He made her feel seen again. And soon, what had begun as an innocent flirtation turned into something much darker. Elaine had seduced him with gifts, with money, with promises of a future free from the struggles of his own life. His parents were poor, barely making ends meet. He needed a way out, and Elaine had given him one. What neither of them knew was how far she was willing to go. By March 20th, 2012, detectives had enough evidence to arrest Elaine Thompson. The affair was undeniable. The phone records, the secret rendezvous, the surveillance footage. It all painted a picture of a woman who had grown tired of her marriage and had turned to a boy who had no idea he was about to be caught in a web of deceit that would destroy him. Elaine had planned everything. She thought she could kill Gregory and walk away free, slipping into a new life with Jason, but she had underestimated him. Jason had known nothing about the murder plan until it was too late. And when he finally understood, what Elaine had done. He made a choice that would change everything. What happened next would be a betrayal so devastating that Elaine never saw it coming. In the early summer of 2011, Ridgewood, Illinois, was just beginning to settle into its familiar, slow-moving routine. The heat lingered in the air, thick and unmoving, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and pavement warmed by the sun. The kind of days where time felt slower, where small-town gossip drifted lazily between backyards, and where nothing truly exciting ever seemed to happen. But beneath the quiet surface of Maple Avenue, a scandal was beginning to take shape, one that would end in betrayal, obsession, and murder. It began subtly. Elaine Thompson, 48, had lived in her house for over 20 years. She knew every family on the block, every morning routine, every unspoken tension hidden behind closed doors. Her own marriage was one of those unspoken tensions. Gregory was never home. He was always on a plane, in a meeting in some hotel room across the country, too preoccupied with work to notice how stale their relationship had become. The passion that once existed had faded years ago, leaving behind nothing but obligation. But Jason Miller, 18, was different. Elaine had watched him grow up from the boy next door into something else, something sharp, something confident, something undeniably tempting. He was nothing like Gregory. He was young, he was alive, and more importantly, he was right there every day, just a fence away. At first, she played the role of the friendly neighbor, the way any older woman might. If she saw him sweating in the sun while mowing the lawn, she'd call him over for a cold drink. When she noticed him struggling with his bicycle chain one afternoon in July 2011, she made her first real move. She had walked outside barefoot, dressed in a silk robe that barely concealed the smoothness of her legs. In her hands, she held 2 glasses of wine. The way she handed him one was casual, effortless, as though it was something she had done 100 times before. Jason hesitated. He was raised well enough to know that this was a dangerous line to cross. She was married. But Elaine was patient. She knew how to pull him in. Over the next few weeks, she made sure he always had a reason to come over. A favor she needed, a piece of mail mistakenly delivered, a story she had to share. The conversations were light at first, playful even, but the undertones were impossible to ignore. The way she stood too close, the way she laughed just a little too softly, the way she touched his arm when she didn't need to. By the time August arrived, Jason was no longer avoiding her advances. He was addicted to them. By September 2011, Elaine and Jason had crossed the line completely. There were stolen moments in the kitchen when Gregory was away on business trips. Secret meetings in hotel rooms an hour outside of town. Her bedroom, his car, anywhere they could steal time together without being seen. Jason had never felt anything like this before. She wasn't like the high school girls he had been with. Elaine was elegant, experienced, intoxicating. She knew exactly what to say to make him feel like the most important person in the world. But it wasn't just about desire anymore. By November 2011, Jason was in love. Elaine had given him more than just physical affection. She had given him money, gifts, security. When his mother struggled to pay the bills, Elaine was suddenly there, offering help under the guise of charity. She paid for his college applications, his clothes, even small luxuries he never thought he could have. But Elaine wanted more. She began to hate the time spent waiting for Gregory to leave. The days where she had to pretend to be the loyal wife when all she wanted was to be with Jason. The love she had for him turned into something darker, something desperate. By January 2012, she had made up her mind. If Gregory was gone, she and Jason could finally be together. Elaine had been thinking about it for months, but the idea fully took shape in February 2012. She didn't suggest it outright, at least, not at first. One night, lying next to Jason in bed at a secluded motel, she ran her fingers along his chest, tracing invisible patterns. She spoke softly, her voice laced with something heavy, dangerous. If Gregory were gone, there would be nothing in their way. They could be together forever. At first, Jason thought she was joking. But as the words kept coming, as her fingers curled around his arm, he understood. She meant every word. Elaine had a plan. Gregory was set to return from a business trip on March 5th, 2012. That night, she would drug him, slipping crushed sleeping pills into his drink at dinner. Once he was unconscious, she would stage an accident. Maybe she would push him down the stairs. Maybe she would drown him in the bathtub. It had to look natural, an accident, a terrible tragedy, nothing that would lead back to her. Jason didn't have to do anything, he just had to be there. Be with her after it was over. But something about the way she spoke made his stomach turn. He loved her, but this was murder. By the time March 1st arrived, Jason had begun pulling away. His responses were slower. His once eager touch became hesitant. Doubt crept in. Elaine noticed. She wasn't stupid. She had spent months controlling Jason, making sure he was dependent on her, making sure he needed her just as much as she needed him. She couldn't afford to lose him now. So she changed her tactics. She reminded him how miserable his life would be without her. She spoke about his mother, his future, his dreams. Without her, what would he have? Nothing. She had built him into the person he was becoming. He owed her. For a moment, Jason believed her. He let himself sink deeper, telling himself that maybe this was the only way. But then on March 4th, 2012, just one night before the plan was supposed to happen, he looked at himself in the mirror and realized the truth. If he went through with this, he would never escape Elaine. Not now, not ever. And so he made his decision. The next morning, March 5th, 2012, he left before Elaine could find him. He didn't go to school. He didn't go home. Instead, he went to see Gregory Thompson himself. And everything changed. On the morning of March 5th, 2012, the weight of what was about to happen sat heavily on Jason's chest. The plan was set. That night, Gregory Thompson would die. He had spent the last month hearing Elaine whisper about it, dream about it, plan it down to the smallest detail. But in the hours leading up to it, something inside Jason shifted. The idea of a life without Gregory had seemed romantic in the beginning. It meant Elaine would finally belong to him. They would be free, just the two of them, without secrets, without stolen moments. But now the reality of it felt suffocating. It wasn't just a fantasy anymore, it wasn't just words. By 10 a.m., Jason knew he had to make a decision. He spent hours replaying everything in his head. The texts, the whispers, the way Elaine's eyes darkened when she talked about her husband. He had been blind before, caught in the excitement, trapped in the way she made him feel like he was the only person who mattered. But now the fog had cleared. This wasn't about love. This was about control. By 4:15 p.m., he had made up his mind. He wasn't going to let Elaine get away with this. The streets of Ridgewood were quiet as he walked, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. The houses blurred together, but Jason barely saw them. Every step toward 237 Maple Avenue felt heavier than the last. By the time he reached Gregory's front door, his heartbeat was so loud he thought it might give him away. When Gregory opened the door, he didn't understand at first. His expression flickered between confusion and mild irritation. He had just gotten back from his business trip and barely had time to settle in. But as Jason stood there hesitating, something about the way he looked, pale, tense, almost sick, made Gregory step aside and let him in. Jason hadn't planned his words. He hadn't planned anything. He just took out his phone, scrolled through the messages, and held it up. Elaine's words, cold, calculated, filled with deadly intent, were all there in black and white, but that wasn't what made Gregory go still. It was the recordings. At 4:52 p.m., Gregory pressed play. Elaine's voice filled the room, eerily calm. She spoke in careful, deliberate sentences, mapping out every detail of the murder she had been planning for weeks. How she would crush the pills, how she would watch as Gregory's body went limp, how she would clean up afterward, leaving no trace of what she had done. The words did not sound like the woman Gregory had married. For the first time in his life, he was completely shattered. But Gregory didn't break. He didn't panic. He was a man used to handling high-pressure situations. Instead of rage, he felt something colder, determination. By 5:10 p.m., he picked up the phone. By 5:22 p.m., the police were listening to the same recordings. By 6 p.m., the plan had changed. Elaine had spent months believing she had control, but what she didn't know was that by the time she poured the drugged wine that night, the police would already be watching. The evening of March 5th, 2012 unfolded like a carefully rehearsed play. Gregory walked into his home at 7:45 p.m., exactly as he was supposed to. The suitcase from his business trip was still unpacked in the bedroom. Everything looked normal. Nothing had changed, except for him. Elaine was waiting. She kissed him, ran her fingers through his hair, and moved through the house with the same ease, the same charm, the same manipulative grace she had always carried. She had no idea her every move was already being documented. By 8:30 p.m., she poured the wine. Gregory took the glass. He pretended to drink. She watched, waiting. She had done her research. The pills would take effect in under 30 minutes, but instead of swallowing, Gregory poured the wine into the potted plant behind him. The liquid soaked into the soil, its effects dying before they could ever reach him. He had never felt more awake in his life. At 11:45 p.m., Elaine was standing over him. Gregory was sprawled on the couch, eyes half closed, body limp. She waited a moment longer, as if to make sure he was really out. Her breathing was shaky, her hands curled into fists at her sides. The poker was already in her grip. This was it. She lifted it, adjusting her stance. The weight of it in her hands wasn't foreign. She had rehearsed this in her mind so many times. And then the lights flashed on. The air split with the sound of shouting. Detectives swarmed the room before Elaine even had time to register what was happening. By 11:47 p.m., she was pinned to the ground, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her wrists twisting against the cold steel of the handcuffs. She thrashed, but it was useless. She didn't understand. She'd been so careful. And then, as they dragged her up, her gaze locked onto Jason. He was standing in the doorway, watching it all happen. He had betrayed her. Her lips trembled, her voice breaking apart as she spoke, words filled with something too raw, too painful, too desperate. Jason couldn't answer. He just stood there as the woman who had once made him feel like the center of her world was taken away in handcuffs, her screams still echoing through the house. By March 20th, 2012, the case against Elaine was undeniable. The messages, the recordings, the surveillance footage, the failed murder attempt, it all told a story she couldn't escape. Her trial moved quickly, there was no room for doubt. By July 2012, she was sentenced to 33 years in prison. Jason, though free, never felt that way. The town never forgave him. To them, he was not the boy who stopped a murder. He was the boy who had seduced a married woman, the boy who had nearly helped her get away with it. By August 2012, Jason left Ridgewood. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He just knew he couldn't stay. And Elaine, she never stopped thinking about him. Even from behind bars, she whispered his name. Jason? 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 The boy she would have killed for. The boy who betrayed her. The boy who could never forget her. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates. And you can check out another insane case we have. The case where a just married husband beats cheating wife to death 5 days after wedding night. Make sure to check it out and let us know your thoughts in the comments section.